victimless crimes. And I certainly wasn't interested in any of all that other stuff, but I have a funny feeling that after I spent some time there, I would probably be conditioned by the system to, cause me to suddenly somehow believe that this was all appropriate. That's why I used the example of the Nazis, because there were so many people that were just normal people that they turned into ruthless killers. That's an extreme example, but, I imagine that every one of the members of the Gestapo at one time was just a kid playing with toys like anyone else. I imagine that every member of the SS, who manned those concentration camps at one time, would have never considered doing something like that. And especially when an economy tanks, like it did in Nazi Germany, it's extremely easy to convince people to do this kind of stuff. And that's the other thing you see in all of these places where you see people, like the welfare offices, the unemployment offices, is there's recruiters. And there's recruitment posters everywhere. It's almost like they don't need to draft us anymore. They'll just tank the economy so that, more and more of my friends every day join the military for college or to take care of their families because there's just nothing else here. Mm-hmm. And that problem is spreading, and I guess that, however, when the system crashes and we end up in a situation where, you have more circumstances where now I guess we have to have bulletproof glass at every major government facility, and we're going to install more security officers. When that doesn't work, and inevitably violence and riots starts to break out, it's going to be soldiers who are sent to go deal with it, even though that's supposed to be illegal. And if we treat the soldiers in such a way that continues to assist the soldiers to come to the conclusion, all this stuff my CO told me about these people being evil terrorists must be true. Look at what they're doing. It isn't going to be conducive to us getting out of that situation, I guess was the point I was trying to get at. And police are kind of in that same line. I mean, we had a guy actually who, one of the viewings, I think it was the Los Angeles viewing for Peter Joseph's last film, Zeitgeist Moving Forward, he got up at the end during the Q&A and he said, I'm a Los Angeles police officer, and I want you to know that there are actually a lot of people in my line of work who understand what you guys are talking about the things the government is doing wrong, and we're actually with you. He says, I'm not talking for all of them, but there are a lot of us that are. So think about that when you're dealing with this, and what could possibly happen. That some of us do support what you're talking about. They figure it out. They get it. And we have to make sure that more of them get it, I guess would be my point. We have to reach out to them and educate them and help them understand the truth of the situation. And that's one of the reasons why, like, the nonviolent protests of Martin Luther King worked so well, was because it was really frickin' obvious who was being the abusive jackhole when you got a bunch of peaceful protesters getting the crap beat out of them on a regular basis, who never laid a hand on anyone, never threatened anybody, was never mean to anybody, and as long as they kept their noses clean, that's what made those protests effective. I had somebody actually on my show from Occupy Wall Street on the last show. To those of you tuning in today who might have missed that, you can check that out in my archives. Actually, you'll find it right now on the widget at v-radio.org. There's a widget with my last 5 shows on it. And I told him, I said, well, you need to tell those girls that as odd as this is, the ones who got maced, that they essentially won a victory, because the fact that that cop did that has now gotten all kinds of attention for their cause. And the fact that the cop did it and nobody did anything to justify it only made their cause even more, look even better and look even stronger at that point. Because then it makes it clear somebody's cracking down in a tyrannical fashion. They want these people to be silenced. That's exactly what you want people to see when they're looking at your protest, because it points the fingers at the real guilty people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose the thing is, though, is that, between the point that we are at right now and the point that we, assume that is going to be somewhere in the future, is an opportunity for us to, put this on a different track. And that means, actually confronting some of these people and, taking the time to, like you was talking about, listening to, a cop on a midnight shift or whatever. You got to take a little bit of time to understand their perspective, because I can tell you, when I was a soldier and I was facing, I was sitting on the border in West Germany at the time, looking over into East Germany, and all the Russians looking back at me, all I know is they wanted to kill me. and if they came across that line, that was my job, was to kill them, and so that was basically all that was the extent that I thought about it, If they come across the line, I'm pulling the trigger.
Right.
But the thing is that you got to think, you've got to give them a little bit more information to get them to the point that they start thinking about it. Because I remember, right at the end of my Army career, that I was reading Gorbachev's, I think it was Perestroika, and I was sitting on a tank, and we ain't got nothing else to do, so I whip out this book, and I'm reading the book, and here our XO comes along, and he sees that book, and he sees like Gorbachev on the front of it, and he's like, "What in the hell are you doing?" And his thing is what do I got, a communist infiltrator in my unit? Of course, we know each other to a certain extent, and it spurs of course we have a relationship that we can kind of cook down that situation into, he understands my point of view, and let me tell you what I'm doing here. I'm trying to learn more about the enemy. I mean, if you look into the movie Patton, there's a part where he's like going to sleep and he puts the book down, and it's a book written by Rommel.
Right.
And that's basically the way I approached it with him. And, he was okay with that, but the fact of the matter is that, like the first impression in a lot of cases, if you don't, take the time to investigate further, you can go, way off, into some crazy ideas. And that's really kind of what's being exacerbated in a lot of cases, on both sides. If you look at, police training, just like you said, the police pulls you over, and he says, that's where most police get killed, is when they pull people over. Well, that's also what they're being told in their training, and is that statistically the case? I'm not sure. But basically, they're being trained to be apprehensive in that situation. They're being trained to, if someone makes a move with an object in their hand, that could be a gun, and so they're saying, hey, if you're in that situation, you got to make a decision, and that, make it now, and shoot and ask questions later. Well, we've got to be the ones that say, hey, hold on a minute, think about this situation, think about the statistics involved, just like with terrorists, a lot of the police believe that, terrorists are right around the corner, or at least they're told that. We know that there aren't that many terrorists. We're more likely to get hit by lightning than, killed by a terrorist. And so
more people die worldwide from peanut allergies than terrorist attacks.
So, your apprehension level needs to be, at the level that is the real threat, not way the heck up when, somebody pops through the door. And to a certain extent, that's, on both sides. People look at police in a certain way, and they kind of reflect that, that animosity or distrust or fear or whatever it is. And, we kind of create the situation that could be disastrous.
Jake?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that, I do think that there is an issue with, the way that police are, the training, going back even with the military, to try to stir up the hornet's nest and, create an animosity or, brainwash people into thinking that, that's what they're thinking, they may harm you, so you better be ready, to harm back, to go along, I just feel like, we got way too many situations where just, we're hyped up over nothing. And that right now we are. We have way too much. The military's too big. The police presence is too big. And it is. The training, the police on the East Coast are the same as the police on the West Coast. It's just too much hype over nothing.
Right, and the different ways that they associate things that activists talk about with terrorism. I actually have a PDF copy of a pamphlet handed out to law enforcement at one point that stated that anybody who watched the Zeitgeist film was probably involved with, or involved with militias, and anybody who is interested in the Federal Reserve, well, they are terrorist suspects, even though I've yet to see any terrorist acts committed by any United States citizen because of the banks. There was that guy who flew his plane into the building that I did a show about, Mr. Stack or whatever. Right. You guys can listen to that show on my archives too. But as far as the way they make it out, especially when you read some of the legislation that they propose. When I was running for Congress, I had to, of course, do all of that. And, they make it sound like terrorism, like there's just suicide bombers, leaping into McDonald's every 5 minutes. We need to do something about this right now. And, what I always found to be kind of contradictory, regardless of anybody's feelings about border issues, is the fact that they're really concerned about feeling up 3-year-olds at the airport, but they're not too big on closing the borders to Mexico. If there was this huge rash of terrorist people who are interested in being terrorists, if I were an Arabic terrorist, I'd just get on a boat, go to Mexico, and walk across the United States border with all the other slightly dark-skinned, mustached men. Especially in a distance, you couldn't pick out the difference between an Arab and a Mexican. So, if that's what they wanted to do, it wouldn't even be hard. If you're worried about any group of people coming into the United States, I think they've figured out that the planes are probably not the best way to do it anymore. No guerrilla tactic fighter worth his, weight would ever try the same tactic twice. If you're going to have more and more, don't get me wrong, I understand, if it was a problem, you'd have to look into it, but it's clear that they're only worried about certain things. And the funny thing is that the more the laws and the regulations that they've made to keep the terrorists, quote unquote, protect us from the terrorists, they're affecting our lives. They're not affecting anybody, who actually might be in a position to do it. That's why I said it becomes more and more clear over time that they're not really as worried about people from, Arabic countries as they are citizens in this, this very country.
Well, and there's an element that somebody has, whether they're in the military or whether they're a policeman, and that is that they're protecting people, and that they're protecting them from these perceived evils, Mm-hmm. And so to a certain extent, when you attack those perceived evils and make them not look so dangerous, to some it basically hurts their pride, or at least it feels like to them it's an attack on their pride. And that's the kind of thing that I think to a certain extent, when you say something like we support the troops and thank you for your service and that kind of thing, we're kind of perpetuating the wrong idea about, we're almost perpetuating the illusion and keeping that illusion alive for those that want to use that to rationalize, what they do.
Sure.
It's not the paycheck for them. It's the fact that they're being a hero to everybody else. And when you accuse them of basically fighting ghosts, they lose their hero status, in their mind. And so, that's why I think a lot of them act rashly, when they're, when really they have, they're idealists.
Right.
They really have a good, they have a good intention, but they're basically sold on an illusion. And, the fact of the matter is, it's like, to a certain extent, once you